Hello again. We are back, and I have the privilege of introducing Michele Zanini. He's the co-author of the Wall Street Journal bestseller, Humanocracy, as you can see there, creating organizations and amazing people inside them. He's also the co-founder of the Management Lab, where he helps large organizations become more adaptable, innovative, and engaging places to work. I'm super excited for this conversation where he's going to talk about humanocracy, how to create resilient organizations, meaningful jobs, and zero bureaucracy. Once again, place your questions in the Q&A, and we'll get to those in about 20 minutes. Thank you so much, Michele. Take it away.
All right. Thank you, Rachel. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. I'd like to share some ideas out of our book and leave you with some practical notions for leveraging your organization's capabilities to the fullest extent and for creating truly meaningful jobs for everyone, right? And here's the agenda. First, I want to convince you that we need a radical change in how we're organized, how we lead and manage our organizations. Second, share some insights that we've distilled from organizations that have succeeded by becoming bureaucracy-free zones. Third, touch on the importance of injecting new principles or new management DNA, if you will, into our organizations. And then last, wrap up with some advice on how to get started, how to go from there, from here to there, which is often the biggest stumbling block. It's a huge agenda. We cover all of that in the book. We only have 20 minutes, so I'll try to move smartly through it and just highlight the key points that then you can explore further in the book if you so choose. So let's get going. Why should we care about busting bureaucracy and replacing it with something better? Well, let me start by asking you to do something for me. Can you please take a moment and score your organization on the following dimensions? No need to do this with formally with pen and paper. Just look at the list and think about where your organization would land on each continuum here. And I'll let you do that for a few seconds. Okay. So I think our experience at least suggests that unless your organization is relatively small or truly exceptional, it probably does tilt to the right side of the scale, right? And fact of the matter is, even world-beating companies are burdened with this, And let me give you an example that kind of exemplifies the lack of speed and innovation that is the norm in most large organizations. And this comes by way of Eric Wan. He's a Chinese immigrant who started his career as a software engineer at WebEx in 1997. 10 years later, WebEx was acquired by Cisco. And by 2010, Eric had a really good job. He was the head of engineering for WebEx. So 6-figure salary, 300 people working for him. But his job, he felt, wasn't very meaningful. He wasn't very happy. And the problem, according to him, is that the product wasn't very good. Logging on WebEx was painful. There was no screen sharing for mobile devices, very choppy video and audio when you had lots of people there. And he pestered his bosses for over a year, arguing that, in the new smartphone age, we needed simpler, more intuitive ways of bringing people together, right, online. But they wouldn't let him move forward with this idea. And, he was sure that someone else would come and do what he was trying to do, kind of create a cloud-based frictionless experience. So he quit Cisco, Eric did, and he ended up creating his own little startup. And that little startup is Zoom, right? And we're not using Zoom today, but I bet you've been using Zoom over the last several weeks, as hundreds of millions of people do every day. And the crazy thing about Zoom is that it's nearly as much, in terms of market value, as much of the whole of Cisco. It's about $130, $140 billion, depending on the day. So that's as much as the entirety of Cisco. And Cisco isn't just about WebEx, right? They do all sorts of things. And, you can think of this kind of market value of Zoom as, in a way, the price of inertia. What would have happened to Cisco had they let Eric try his idea out, right? And it also shows the price of not having meaningful opportunities for talented people. What could have been a game-changing idea for Cisco literally just walked out the door, right? So part of the motivation for writing the book was to build organizations that can outrun change, but there was also more kind of personal, ethical reason to care for this. And, one of the big reasons why organizations disappoint us, we think, is because they're kind of hobbled by their inhumanity. And it's a bold thing to say, but all the data suggests that most people are just not bringing their best selves to work, right? And you've probably seen this engagement data from Gallup lots of times. This is a global average, and I won't belabor it, only to say that it's pretty shocking that 15% of people feel like they're highly engaged, and the fact that this has been pretty consistent over time. And here's why it matters. Picture for a moment a hierarchy of work-related capabilities, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. At the bottom of this, you have obedience. Every organization depends on employees who are capable of following basic rules, orders, safety, financial discipline, and the like. You also need people to be diligent, people that want to work hard and take responsibility. And you want people to have skills, requisite skills to do their jobs. They need expertise. These are pretty important capabilities. In a way, they're essential, but they're not going to, create value. They're kind of commodity capabilities, right? Because in the creative economy, winning requires more. You need people that have initiative. We're self-starters, right? We're not going to wait to be asked, or not going to be bound by their job description. You want people to be creative. That people reframe problems and generate new ideas, like Eric did at Cisco. And finally, you want passion. You want a willingness to stretch oneself and take risks for a worthy cause. And these are higher order capabilities, which are the products of daring, of a commitment to something that inspires us, that's something that is really meaningful. And yet, these aren't things that you can command. You can encourage them as a company, but employees end up deciding whether to bring these or not. And as the Gallup data suggests, the answer is typically no. And sometimes it's like, no effing way, we're going to be this. Yeah. And, the thing that is pretty shocking is that if you look at initiative and how important it is, how little of it people really have, how little agency people have to exercise their gifts. And, if you look at large-scale workplace condition survey from the US and Europe, you get the same results. When you look at people who are not managers, when people that are a little bit further down in the organization, very few feel like their opinions count. They can shape decisions that are important to their work. They can take risks to improve, things that are important for customers, and that, are unable to choose important aspects of their work life, including who they work with. And despite the hype about employee experience and engagement, these numbers really haven't been getting very much better. And with little autonomy, you also don't have opportunities to exercise and build creative skills. Everybody says, "Oh, creative skills are and creativity are the things. It's the thing that's going to save us from the machines and from the threat of automation." Fair enough, and that's what World Economic Forum report found out. They put creativity, originality, initiative as a top 5 skills for 2025. The problem is our jobs are simply not designed to take advantage of these skills. And people actually do have them. It's people always talk about the fact that this is a skills gap because people are not skilled enough. Well, it's actually, the problem is on the other side, on the demand side. And let me just share with you this data, which is pretty astonishing. We dredged this up as part of the research for the book. So in the U.S. economy, you can, the Bureau of Labor Statistics scores every job according to different skill content. One of the skills is originality. So it'll score every job, a 0 if originality is not important, 100 if it's really important. So then with that, you can then multiply that score by the number of people working in each occupation. And what you find is that most people in the U.S., 70% work in jobs where creativity and originality is not important. I mean, just think about that, right? And this, as I said, says very little about the people in the jobs and more about the tendency for our traditional models to consider these people semi-programmable robots. And you can imagine what kind of meaning can they draw from jobs where they're not expected to think and be creative and be original, which is a deeply human attribute, right? So none of this is okay, but as we argue in the book, it's also not surprising, right? And you kind of have to recognize why this is the case before you set out to change it. And, writing more than 100 years ago, this guy, Max Weber, is a German sociologist. He said that bureaucracy is perfected to the extent that it's dehumanized. And, by that measure, we've done pretty well, right? In its search for discipline and reliability, bureaucracy has stripped meaning, this judgment, creativity out of work. It's left very little place for those things that make us human, artistry, love, intuition. Those are all kinds of suspect attributes. And even though you might think that bureaucracy is kind of an old-fashioned term, like saying horsepower or something, it remains a standard operating system for most organizations around the world. It's very ubiquitous. Just look at these traits, right? These are the essential features of bureaucracy. And then ask yourself, how many of these apply to your organization, in your work? You may not call this bureaucracy, but if this is how your organization rolls, then it's bureaucratic, right? And bureaucracy had a role to play, 100 years ago. When the fundamental challenge was to employ illiterate worker to churn out products efficiently at scale. But today, people are skilled; they're not illiterate. Competitive advantage comes from innovation, not just scale, not just being big. And the pace of change is super fast, right? And despite all of that, we just are stuck in this management technology from 100 years ago. And we've changed dramatically. Car technology, we've gone from this to this, right? And yet our organizations still look like this. This is the org chart from IBM circa 1917. And I tell you, I tried to do this, but then I gave up. But you could populate this chart with like the current top 3 levels of IBM, and it would look pretty credible, right? It would still be a fair portrayal. We still have organizations where we have a caste system of thinkers and doers, and where most people are just placing their brains on ice. And the problem is that we have the quality that we need in people. People are resilient, they are creative, they are passionate, they are daring, and yet our organizations are not, right? They're just not as capable, as adaptable, as innovative and passion-filled as they ought to be. And this is a problem ethically and economically, because our organizations are not going to be as productive as they ought to be. So, our word for the alternative is humanocracy. We wanted something different from the dominant paradigm. And we wanted to build an organization that is not about maximizing compliance, but rather maximizing contribution. And the fundamental difference is this. If there's one thing I'd like you to take away from today's talk is this. In a bureaucracy, human beings are the resources. They're the tools that the organization uses to, make money. In a humanocracy, organizations that are espousing post-bureaucratic practices and principles, it's the organization that is the tool. The human beings are the agents. They're using the organization to better their lives and the lives of others. And this is a very profound shift in perspective, and one that creates a completely different way of managing and organizing, as I will get into. So that's all fine. I hopefully you bought the fact that we need to change the way we're managed, but it's like bureaucracy is bad as opposed to what? Like, is there a real alternative? And thankfully, the answer is indeed yes. My co-author Gary Hamill and I spent the last decade looking at identifying the post-bureaucratic vanguard, which includes tens of companies that span multiple industries and geographies. I don't have a lot of time to go through any of these in great detail, but suffice it to say, it's a very diverse list, and it's a pretty impressive one, where all these companies are not only deviants in terms of their practices, but also performance. They're incredibly successful companies. Let me just maybe a couple thumbnail views. One of these companies, one is Haier. They're like an appliance maker in China. They have about 80,000 people worldwide, 6,000 of them are in China. The CEO has been driven over the last 20 years with a vision of empowering every employee, turning them into an entrepreneur, having everyone realize their potential. And so the way they did that is they disaggregated this large enterprise into 4,000 different micro enterprises, little startups that are basically focused on different things, like bringing the product to market, manufacturing the product, creating the right value proposition, R&D, and so on. And with these micro enterprises, all kind of contracted with each other, they've created this kind of internal market where they're all finding ways of relating to one another and bringing new amazing products in a way that doesn't require lots of managers or lots of top-down control. It's a pretty remarkable case. Another case that is completely different is Buurtzorg. They're a large Dutch home health service provider. They have about 16,000 nurses and other care workers, and they're organized in more than 900 self-managing teams. Again, like Haier, it's small teams that are responsible for finding clients, renting space, recruiting, budgeting, scheduling, constantly improving the quality and efficiency of care. They do this inside, with part-time roles, and they have basically no management layers, only 50 people at the center essentially managing the IT system, and that's it. And despite that, they're incredibly efficient, and patient satisfaction is higher than any competitor. So, more broadly, when you look at the post-bureaucratic vanguard, Haier, Buurtzorg, and many others, you get a glimpse of the kinds of practices that are in very different contrast with the bureaucratic status quo. And some of them are listed here. But it's important to note, our model isn't like holacracy or agile at scale, where you have very specific practices that are codified and detailed and standardized. The thread connecting a lot of these organizations is less about what they do and more about how they think, right? And let me just get into that real quick now, and the importance of principles over practices. Because as we study these organizations, we ask ourselves again and again, how do they end up with these practices? And what we discovered is that they started with some very deep principles, deep ways of thinking that are very unconventional in the kind of traditional world. And this makes sense because in any endeavor of human activity, right, you reach a point where you can't solve new problems kind of with old principles. It's like, in the 18th century, people that were championing self-government had to challenge the divine right of kings and come up with all sorts of pro-democracy principles like universal suffrage and religious liberty and freedom of the press and so on, right? And similarly, the principles of bureaucracy, stratification, standardization, and so on, are great at solving the problem of efficiency at scale and compliance, but they're no help at all when it comes to solving problems like innovation at scale, resilience at scale, engagement at scale, meaning at scale. In fact, they work against you, right? So we need to go to first principles if we want to build an organization that is fundamentally more capable than the ones that we have today. And so if the goal of humanocracy is to maximize contribution, what are the kinds of principles that we've observed in these vanguard organizations that really bring the best out of people? And we distilled 7 of them: ownership, meritocracy, markets, experimentation, community, openness, and paradox. I don't have time to unpack these. There's a whole chapter in the book around each of these. But what I guess what I leave you with on this front is that the work of reinventing management and what these companies have done is they've taken these principles and they thought about, like, how do we weave them into the way we manage, lead, and organize? Many of you are probably familiar with the idea of a business model canvas. Well, you can do the same thing for the management model. There are different parts of the organization, processes and structures and the like. And so can you rethink these in light of these principles? Let me give you a practical example. Take markets. Markets are amazing at leveraging collective insight, the wisdom of the crowd, and they're also great at allocating resources really flexibly. So how might you take this principle to inform the way work gets done? So, for instance, you can use crowdsourcing to get a common perspective around the direction of the company. You can create prediction markets to test whether a product is going to do well or not before you put it to market. You can multiply sources of funding, create multiple venture capitalists, as opposed to allocating budgets the way the Soviet Union does, which is the way most companies do, right? Top down, very formulaic, and so on. So the idea is to generate alternatives to the status quo by taking these principles to heart. So in the few minutes I have left, let me close with a few thoughts on the migration path, right? So how do you begin the journey towards a post-bureaucratic organization, towards a humanocracy, if you will? How do you move from a management model that emphasizes compliance to one that energizes contribution? And our experience with companies that have embarked on this journey, some of which we feature in the book and other writing, like Michelin and GE Appliances, is that you need to take the tenets of traditional change programs and kind of do the opposite. Traditional approaches to change are just simply inadequate for the complexity of the challenge. Most of our thinking about change management still assumes that it's kind of an engineering problem. It's like you're building a bridge. It's something that the experts at the top are initiating, and everybody else is executing a plan that is highly prescribed, means and ends, and with a clear beginning and a clear end. Like it's an episodic kind of interruption of the status quo. And we think instead that we should stop talking about change management and talk about hacking management. And by hacking, I don't mean those evil people that steal your credit card data, but rather those who post code on GitHub, right? The people who don't wait to be asked. They don't think, oh, that's someone else's problem. They take initiative, and they act as if they have permission, even though they may not. And they tackle problems together as a community of passion. And the right analogy for us is Linux, right? So Linux came to the fore in the early 1990s as a group of rebel coders who just were fed up with Microsoft and wanted to kind of undermine their monopoly power. And Linus Torvalds, the most famous hacker, released his first version of the kernel of Linux in 1991 and basically said, help me make it better, right? And other people joined the fray, and now Linux is 26 million lines of code, and it's been contributed to by 16,000 people. And somehow we all are kind of prisoners of this idea that management practices are either immutable, law of gravity. This is how performance reviews get done, or if they change, they can only change from the top. And we think that's complete BS, right? We can approach organizational change in a much more effective way. And let me just give you this quote from Linus, which is one of my favorites, right? So he's saying, don't make the mistake of thinking you can design something better than what you get from a massively parallel trial and error with a feedback cycle. That's giving your intelligence too much credit. And I think that's a message I hope a lot of our leaders will hear, right? So basically what he's saying is, to solve a complex problem, you need to syndicate the decision-making to a large group of people who search for the best solutions and sync up with each other in a way that is most effective. It's like you're rewriting the management code base, and that needs to be disaggregated with small teams that should be empowered to work and innovate on individual components. And we call these kinds of innovations management hacks. Again, I'm running out of time. There's more here in the book, but let me just give you very quickly an example of what a hack might look like. And this comes from a pharma company, so highly regulated industry, where you might think you can't change anything related to management. But in this case, a group of mid-level managers said, we are sick of the travel policy we have. We manage a budget of $7 million in sales, but we still need to account for a $3 cup of coffee. It's just ridiculous. And it's just sapping engagement and passion, and it's a waste of time. So they concocted, as good pharma people as they are, an experiment with treatment group and control groups in different parts of the company. But it was like a few hundred people, nothing more. And this is a company with tens of thousands of people. So a very small slice of the company. And they said, the treatment group, they have no expense policy, but the catch is they have to show all their expenses online for others to check if they want to. And the treatment group the control group proceeded as normal. And what they found after a few months is that not only were people happier without having this expense reporting kind of gauntlet to go through, but expenses actually went down. People were more judicious now that they had to kind of make account of what they did for everyone else to see. So, you can take this kind of logic, experimental prototypical logic, and apply it to all kinds of ways in which you manage. And we have a little template in the book and online for thinking about that. Like you start to ideate different experiments you can run. And let me just, I know we're probably exceeding our time a little bit, but maybe just last couple of points. What I hope I conveyed to you is that management innovation is a constant process, that over time will help large organizations migrate from bureaucracy to humanocracy. So it's a set of like experiments that you launch and you iterate and you advance the sophistication of these over time. And at the end, you end up with a completely different organization, but it's a very gradual process. So it's revolutionary in end, but evolutionary in approach. And for me, it's less about bridge building and more learning from the metamorphosis that happens with insects, like going from caterpillar to butterfly. It's a radical change in function, right? But it's incredibly natural and it's not traumatic. And we need this kind of thinking, this kind of approach to finally bust bureaucracy and make organizations that are really fit for the future and for the people that work inside of them. And this is where you can find me. You can check out more on our site, humanocracy.com. And one plug, if you buy the book, you get access to, for now anyway, a 4-hour course called Hack My Org. It's packed with lots of tools, content, videos that goes far deeper. And I encourage you to check it out. And Rachel, I'll hand it back over to you for Q&A.
I so love this, and it's fascinating. I mean, I personally work, Typeform is about 300 people, and I've previously worked for much larger organizations, and so lots of takeaways. In the interest of time, we are running a bit over, so I'm going to ask one quick question, and this is maybe this is a yes or no. I'm trying to figure out. In your opinion, is the Nordic model somehow closer to humanocracy?
Well, so there are a lot of Nordic companies that are maybe more human-centric, but I don't think that ascribing this to particular geographies is quite correct. I mean, think about China and higher. So the most radical example of unfettered internal capitalism that you can find, which is higher, with these internal markets, happens in a communist regime, in a communist country, at least nominally communist country. I mean, all these are human values; they're universal values. They might be interpreted differently depending on the cultural context, but there's no way this can't be applicable really wherever human beings work.
Great. Well, Michele, it's been a pleasure. Everyone listening, if you can, purchase the book, get the course, Humanocracy, and we will be sharing these recordings, so you'll also have access to all of Michele's social channels. And if you have questions, don't worry, pop them in the chat. We'll get them to you. We'll answer on social. Michele, thank you. Next up, we have one of our fellow Typeformers, Nico Grenier. He is our developer advocate, and I think he has something quite surprising and special planned, so stay tuned.